Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, members, and welcome to the June meeting of the Borough Council's Planning Committee. I am Councillor Smith and I'm Chairman of the committee. My Vice Chairman, Councillor Fox, is sat to my right. Other members and officers have their names in front of them for ease of reference. I will take a few moments to explain the process we work to in these committees. Each application will be presented by the appropriate case officer. After each presentation, those members of the public who have written to the Council requesting to speak will be invited to take the seat at the opposite end of the table. The time allocation is 3 minutes for each speaker. This will be strictly timed and enforced. The green light displayed on the front of the timer will change to amber when there is 30 seconds remaining and then change to red at the end of 3 minutes. Speeches must relate to material planning issues and must not be derogatory. No questioning is allowed and no further written information, photographs, plans or other material can be submitted at this stage. Those applications on the agenda with public speakers will be dealt with first, so the running order for tonight is as per the agenda. I hope this is clear. If there are any questions, please speak to the officers, myself or the Vice Chairman after the meeting. If the meeting extends beyond 9 p.m, I shall ask for a proposal from the members to extend the meeting to a specific time. Once the item under discussion at that time is resolved, the meeting will then be adjourned and will reconvene on another evening. In order to assist in the process this evening, I must ask everyone to ensure that mobile phones are either switched off or on silent mode. We would be grateful if you would remain quiet whilst the meeting is in progress. I would like to remind everyone present that this meeting will be filmed by the Council and broadcast live on the internet and will be capable of repeated viewing. If you are seated in the chamber, it is possible that the cameras will capture your image. By your presence, you are deemed to consent to be filmed and the use of those images and sound recordings for webcasting and or training purposes. If you address the committee, your contribution will be recorded and broadcast unless this is during a period when the meeting is in private session, as permitted by the Access to Information provisions. As the chairman of the meeting, I can, at my discretion, terminate or suspend filming if, in my opinion, continuing to do so will prejudice the proceedings of the meeting, or if I consider that continued filming might infringe the rights of any individual or breach any statutory provision. There are no planned fire alarms this evening, so if the alarm does sound, there's a fire exit to the rear of the chamber just there, or you can leave through the door through which we came. We now move on to the agenda. Apologies for absence.
None received, Chairman.
Thank you. And we go into declarations of interest. Councillor Hall.
Sorry, Madam Chairman. My application, 24 St Margaret's Avenue, as it's mine, I should leave the room and thank you. But I would like to say, though, that I would like to discuss it sometime because I thought the process was unreasonable.
I think we need to discuss that with officers outside the chamber. Councillor Nottage.
Thank you, Chairman. I'd refer you to the bias test in respect of item 2. I shall leave the room. Thank you.
Councillor Spittle.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. When this property came up before, I declared an interest in respect of historic friendships. So in view of the advice I was given then, I will withdraw from the meeting again. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Spittle. Councillor Bath.
Item A, 132 Stampede. I have a personal interest as family, friends or neighbours. Therefore, I will not take part in that item.
Are there any other declarations of interest? In that case, we shall move on. Move to item 3 of the agenda, minutes, to confirm the minutes from the previous meeting of 24th of May 2018. Do I have a proposer?
Proposed, Madam Chairman.
Councillor Hall, seconder. Councillor Neal. All those in favour? I think that's unanimous. Thank you very much. Those are confirmed. I've signed those. I'll pass those over. And then we go on to item 4A, 132 Stampede. Please.
Thank you, Chair. As described, the description on the first slide there, this is for retention of existing ancillary accommodation at this residential property on Stampede. The location of the site is in here on the red line. You can see there's a fairly narrow frontage to Stampit, but the property extends some considerable depth down to the banks of the harbour. And just to show you a little bit more clearly, and you'll see in the report references to various properties, just to draw your attention to the location of number 134 and number 140, and where the garden of number 140 extends to in relation to the application site, and the building as part of the planning application is here. This shows you on an aerial photo, so it's this dark red area that you can see here is the building in question, and then you see the relationship with the adjoining properties. We've put this slide in to show you the differences between the planning permission that was granted and the current proposals before members, and you'll see, notwithstanding the sort of colour wash on the original approvals, the similarities between the approved and the scheme that you're currently considering. Just to highlight the changes, I hope you can see this rectangle here is in fact the window that's behind some glazed panels that you'll see in the photos in a short while. And so this is a more traditional casement style window, and the approved application was approved with these slit windows here and here. Looking at the front and end elevations, the principal difference on the end elevation facing out towards the harbour is the addition of these patio doors and removal of this sort of Juliet balcony screen here. And then looking from the front, this is the end facing Stampit. Again, we have a more standard window size in here at the first floor and the garage door here. Other changes have been made into the layout, Chair, and in effect what we had on the left hand side was an approved layout with a bedroom that's facing out towards the harbour, bedroom here facing out towards Stampit, and two bathrooms in the middle. The building is constructed and before you today has a lounge at the first floor facing out over the harbour here with a kitchenette, bathroom and bedroom, much as the approved plan. On ground floor, again, the layout and floor plan is slightly different, and some of the area has been given over to storage, and there is a separate in effect room created there with behind the patio doors and the garage area in here. So moving on to some photos of the site, this is the view, the only real view of the building from the public realm through the gap between 132 and 134 on Stampit, so you can just see the building through that gap there. This is from within the site, within the garden of number 132, and the building in question is here. You can just about see the patio doors which have been added, and in effect when taking this photo of the officer's back is to the harbour. This property is number 130A. This is the property at 134, and on the right hand side where we can see this summer house outbuilding, that's the garden of number 140. And this shows a position looking back at the rear of number 132, in effect just outside the front elevation of the building concerned. This is turning around to look at that same view. Here you can see a little bit more clearly the...
Could you pause for one moment, please?
Yes, sorry, Chair.
We have pretty dark pictures here. I don't have to do that setting. We'll concentrate on the screen.
You're happy to use one above me? You're happy to use that one?
Good, thank you, Chair. Yes, so this is the elevation facing Stampit, and behind this window is a bedroom, and this is a secondary window on the side elevation to the same room which has been obscure glazed. It's been obscured, I should say, for accuracy's sake. This is on the end of the building facing out into the harbour, and you can see here from these patio doors on the end this view out, and how the property at number 130A extends further out than the building before you. And that's just a view down into the patio area that's been created to the rear of the building. These are the other side elevation windows and openings which face towards number 134, and this particular window has been obscured. This particular opening has not. And just to show you how they're looking back the other way, so that's the landing room window, the bedroom window that you saw in the previous slides, and then this living room window. These are the views down from to the west, looking out towards the harbour from the garden. Chair, we've been inside the building to take photos to show the degree of obscurity that the windows currently have, and your inability to see anything out of these particular openings. So these are the bedroom windows on the right hand side of this slide, and then the landing room windows here. Now, these are views taken from the secondary living room window, which is on the side elevation, and these are not currently obscure glaze. And you can see from these positions, if you're right in the window, how you would have some views back towards number 134, which is here. And again, from the same position a little bit further back in the room, what you can see here is number 140 and the end of a single story element on that particular dwelling. And that window there is the one that you can see here. And this is a view from that side facing window. Looking back from within the site, this is the side of number 134. You'll see reference in the report to the extension granted on appeal out here, which includes this balcony area to 134, which the inspector found to be acceptable, and again looking back up from the application side. And again another view, this is from the driveway into 132, and then looking back from the same position towards the building. These are views taken from that rear balcony on number 134, where you can see the building here. And the final view is just looking down from the garden of 134 back towards the building in question. So, Chair, there is an existing planning permission for a building on the site. We tried to highlight the changes between the existing, which is unauthorised, but the planning permission which exists as well. Our view is that there are benefits associated with the approval of the current application before you. It allows us to regain a little more control over issues such as the obscure glazing of openings in the side, and also over the use to ensure that it remains ancillary to the main house. For these reasons, and due to the limited differences between the approved and the building as built, we recommend the application for approval, subject to the conditions in the report, Chair.
Thank you very much. We're now going to go on to representations. We have two speakers this evening. If we could take the speakers against the application first, Mr. or Mrs. Holdsworth. If you could take your seat at the desk, take a moment to compose yourself, pop the microphone on and introduce yourself, and then we will start timing once you've introduced yourself.
Good evening, councillors. I'm Aileen Holdsworth. I am the owner with my husband of 134 Stampit. In 2014, your planning officer stated there are no windows on the south side and therefore no overlooking issues. There are in fact 3 sets of windows which directly look into our bedroom, our lounge and overlook our entire back garden. We would refer you to your officer's 5 reasons for recommendation to grant. 1. He states the development is acceptable in principle. Can a back garden self-contained unit in this location be acceptable? H12 criteria 2 clearly states extensions to residential property will be permitted only if existing and future occupiers are not adversely affected by noise, disturbance or loss of light and privacy. We are affected by increased noise, increased vehicle movements, many of them trade vans, and additional visitors. We are disturbed by massive light pollution from roof level downlights. This cannot be acceptable in a conservation area. We suffer a huge lack of privacy because the building was not built with the slit windows on the approved site, on the approved plans. The planning officer's report stated there were no windows. 2. His recommendation to grant states the appearance does not significantly alter against previous approval. Actually, it is considerably worse than the approved plans. At least on those plans, the functionally worthless smoked glass panels matched the slit windows. Now much of this ugly glass redundantly covers the weatherboard. Now we have a building of poor design and appearance, which must be considered contrary to policy BE4 criteria 1. Point 3. The officer states no harm to neighbouring residents when balanced against existing permission. The existing permission was for a 2-bedroom annex with no kitchen, no living space. What was built and has existed for 3 years is a 1-bedroom flat, not linked or ancillary to the main house at all. The applicants only asked for retention of an annex. Again, your planning officer has made another mistake. Point 5 refers to possible formation of an independent dwelling house controlled by condition 2. It already is an independent dwelling house. We ask that this building can never be rented out separately, sold separately, never let as a holiday home, that all windows on the south side be obscured, no opening elements below 1.7, roof level downlights be removed, and lastly, the unsightly brown roof overhang to be repainted white. Thank you.
Thank you very much. If we could now have the speaker for the applicant, Mr. Butler. Again, if you could introduce yourself, and then we'll start the clock once you've done that. Could you pop your microphone on?
How are we doing? Are we there? Sorry, beg your pardon. Madam Chairman, members of the committee, my name is Paul Butler. I'm the co-applicant of this submission. My family have owned and lived in 132 Stampit since 1981. Also, since that time, we have operated Stampit Builders from that same site, only moving the company away 5 years ago when the accommodation above the garage was built. As a local building company, we work day to day with CBC planning and building control departments. And despite the retrospective nature of this application, there was never any intention to alter that good working relationship that we have. The main reason for me speaking here tonight is to confirm that I'm happy with the conditions as set out in Mr. Chilver's report and that they fit in with our intended use of the development. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Janet, could you pop that speaker off for me? Thank you. Okay, we're going to go into questions now. Who would like to start with me? Councillor Nossage.
Can the officers just confirm to me, please, when the first application for the sale loft was reviewed, did that come to committee or was it delegated powers?
It was a delegated decision.
Councillor Spittle.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Could the officers just confirm that apart from the increase in the roof height, that the actual footprint of the development has not changed or did not change at all? And I do thank them for the summary, the table actually on page 12.
Chair, no, the footprint's unchanged. And my understanding is the increase in height is, yes, as set out in the box, so in effect 30 centimetres maximum.
Yeah, if I could just come back. So basically, most of the problems that we have before us are cosmetic, so it will not involve any demolition or any restructuring at all.
No, Chair, just to confirm that the application seeks to retain the building as constructed. Yeah.
Vice Chairman?
Thank you. Just want to confirm something's raised there about the condition about not being let or rented out. Can you confirm that's the purpose of condition 2?
Yes, Chair. The purpose intends to keep the accommodation as ancillary to the main dwelling house, so any use of it as an independent dwelling would be a material change of use, a breach of that particular condition, and something which we would need to take up and investigate and potentially take enforcement action against.
Councillor Nottage.
Can I just clarify that so that I have it absolutely in my brain? When you say ancillary, you mean that there would be some assessment of whether or not, if a holiday home let was made, that the council would take action against that?
Yes, Chair. If the building, if the accommodation approved is used independently of the main dwelling house at number 132, that's a material change of use of the property from a single dwelling house, and in effect creates, without getting overly technical, 2 planning units within the site which are unrelated to each other. So use as a holiday let would, in our view, be a material change of use and something that would be open to us to investigate and take action against as a potential breach of that particular condition.
Thank you. Would that also apply to the issue in respect of accommodation on the ground floor because of the floodplain position that we have?
Yes, yeah, Chair. The reason for restricting the ground floor accommodation to ancillary storage only is because of the high level of flood risk, and that's also one of the reasons why we approval of an independent dwelling on the site would be contrary to our policies, because it would introduce a new dwelling within an area of high flood risk.
My last question, in respect of the requests that have been made about the lighting and the painting of the building, is that acceptable to officers?
Unfortunately, the lighting wouldn't require permission, so that's not before you today to consider. The painting of the brown fascia is probably a step too far to request that, as it's a very minor change from that was originally granted. But you could request that the applicant does it. It's not something that it's not something you could refuse the application on, and we have to consider whether it is a reasonable condition based on the scale of the development and where it is relative to the street scene. It's a minor element of the development, and I think you'll be hard pushed to warrant a condition to that effect.
But you would agree with me that in terms of concessions, as a result of the history that we have with this particular site, the owner would be well advised to concede those issues.
The application has to be considered on its merits, and every condition still has to be reasonable and necessary and proportionate. Effectively, that's sort of condensing
Could we add it as a note on the bottom?
You could add it as an informative note that members would like to see that happen, but I don't think it was something that you could add as a condition.
For the sake of good neighbourliness.
Again, I think the chairman's suggestion that it's actually an informative note is a good one. I don't think it's a reasonable condition against the test of how we have to consider conditions.
Do I have any further questions? In that case, we shall go into debate. And who would like to open? Councillor Nottage, you smiled. It must be your turn.
Surprise, surprise. Well, it's a bit stark, isn't it? If you look at the architecture here, which I know that is not on debate, it's extraordinary that we are where we are following the work that was put in 2007 in respect of the Puel and Stamford conservation site. I find these neighbourhood disputes really difficult, because I can see on both sides that there are issues which people could be quite strongly objectionable to, and I also understand that retrospective planning should be regarded as an ordinary planning application. So I'm in a bit of a quandary, actually, because the reasons I ask the questions about the conditions is that I find that the most important part of this application. I know it's not a material thing. I don't like the architecture. I don't like how it sits in the area, but it's there. So the Courvoisier look of the place is contrary to the Stampit architectural trend, but I can't do anything about that. But I can understand how we could proceed on the basis of there being a reasonable attitude towards good neighbourliness in respect of the requirements called for by the objectors that you've heard for tonight. I'm interested, actually, before I make any suggestion of a proposal for or against, to hear what my colleagues around the table think about this, because bearing in mind this matter has been going on now since 2014. It did not come to this committee originally. I'm not sure what would have happened if it had. So I would hold my case until I hear some further debate, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Nottage. Anybody else wish to debate? Councillor Spittle.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. There are three of us who were actually on this council when there was a similar problem in a neighbouring property, and that caused tremendous. That was at the first time when I was elected in 1999. Consequently, this area is
Councillor
very...
Spittle, can you keep it relevant to this application, please?
It's very... I'm just using... Yes, exactly. This problem is extremely in a very sensitive area, and in view of the fact that the alterations that have been submitted or have been actually done are purely cosmetic and doesn't involve any demolition of the property, or it would very easily be rectified. I find it strange that retrospective here the applicant is actually applying for retrospective planning consent, which I feel is not on, actually. I'm extremely concerned, and I would be willing, having heard if other people would support me, well, I certainly am willing to propose that the various applications that have applied on this site be refused to enable the owner to rectify the problems. But I'll be willing to see if what other people also feel.
Councillor Spittle, I think two things I need to remind you. Firstly, the fact that this is retrospective has no bearing on the application. You have to consider it as you would any other application. And secondly, we are only looking at what is in front of us this evening. We can't change what has happened in the past.
No, and I am. It's only what is in front of us that I feel should be altered. Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Councillor Nottage.
Thank you.
Sorry,
for that.
can I just let the officer come back?
Could I come back on that point? The building is lawful. The building, the shell of the building, the The majority of the structure is lawful, so you've got nothing to take action against. The windows haven't quite gone in accordance with the approved plans in certain locations, but the screening on the external has. So in all intents and purposes, the external appearance of the building is very, very similar to that was granted planning permission in 2013. What we're looking to control and regularise here is effectively the use of that building. So just to make it clear to members, you haven't the building will stay, whatever the decision today. So we're looking at controlling the use and controlling the degree of obscuring the windows that are there. You should be borne in mind that they're actually all non-opening because of these glass screens in front of them. The only opening window is effectively the patio doors at the end and some skylights, which you definitely can't see out of. So it is potentially, by the grant of this consent, the recommendation is basically to put back the control to the authority that is missing at the moment. That's, to be blunt, that's what this application is seeking to do. I hope that helps.
Councillor Nottage.
Thank you for that, and thank you for that clarification, because that's what I was looking for in many respects, because the building is there, it's not going to go away, it's not going to change. We have to be practical about this, but I think also we have to understand that a refusal for this and a submission to an appeal, we would probably lose the conditions which are so important to this particular development, and of course to the objectives as we stand. So on that basis, and if you would give me some movement in respect of the wishes that were asked for in respect of the lights and the painting and whatever, in some words, I would be comfortable in saying, let's stop the debate and move on.
I'm just going to ask our legal advice to join us.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, councillors, the question about the lights and the exterior, and I think the resident made reference to that being an amenity issue impacting upon sleep and obviously respecting privacy. That's another regime. So that could be a statutory nuisance. Your environmental health officers are tasked to actually police and control the Environmental Protection Act of 1990. Any statutory nuisance, noise, smells, effluvia, gas and light is captured by the Environmental Protection Act by a statutory nuisance. Not ordinarily for planning, and in this particular instance, it's one that obviously Mrs. King has mentioned the condition would be unreasonable in a planning sense. However, that's not the end of the matter. Statutory nuisance, any light, any overbearingness in terms of light, simple call to the environmental health officers, it will be monitored, it will be investigated as a potential breach. And that would ordinarily mean an abatement notice, compliance period, and then if there's no compliance with an abatement notice, a prosecution follows. It's that serious for breach of a statutory abatement notice. So rest assured, if there's any impact in terms of light flooding, or impacts upon sleep to the detriment of health, then the environmental protection officers have that power. Thank you.
Councillor Nottage, we interrupted you.
Thank you for that again, which is very helpful. Presumably we can make reference on that as an addendum to the conditions that we have here. So we can't.
It's not a planning matter.
Well,
through you, Councillor Nottage, we have done it. We've added informative notes to applications for, say, for example, on a takeaway, where there's been concerns about smells and litter. We've put an informative note to say that this is covered by other legislation if there is an issue, and pointing people to where that matter can be resolved. We're happy to put an informative note onto that effect, which just highlights the fact to the applicant and anybody else taking this property on in the future, because that will then sit there on the decision notice. So we're happy to do that.
So the conditions that we have in the paperwork would apply,
yes,
plus that additional note.
Yes, the note doesn't have it's an advisory note. It's called an informative note. We put them on when we can't use a condition, because as we've suggested, It's other legislation that will control the statutory nuisance, but what we can make reference to is the fact that there is that other legislation which controls statutory nuisance, and what that legislation is, and how who you would contact if it was an issue. And we do that on a fairly frequent basis.
Can I let Daniel come in again?
So can I also say then, under that basis, are you able to actually suggest some words in respect of good neighbourliness or goodwill or something in respect of?
Can I let Daniel, the legal advice, come in?
I think, Councillor Nottage, to put your fears to bed, the applicant is here. He's heard what I've said in terms of statutory nuisance and possible breaches. The resident is here, and they've heard me mention about statutory nuisance and the alternative regime. With that particular, if you like, steer, I'd like to think that cordial relations could be put back into place with the informative highlighting the other legislative regimes. To push even further, Councillor, I'm sorry, it's going too far. I think in that regards, obviously the applicant and the resident has heard what I said about stat nuisances. You've pushed in terms of the informative for that other legislative code to be there. That informative is not enforceable. However, the applicant and the resident has heard what we've all had to say. Let's hope going forwards that that's cordial and everyone knows their particular rights and issues, and that hopefully have been solved.
Councillor Geary. Could we revert back to the photographs that showed the level of obscuring there is?
Yeah. Chair, if it helps, the purpose of obscuring the views out of those windows is in relation to the privacy of the property to which they face. So if the solution that the applicant has already installed serves that purpose, i.e. it obscures your view out, and our view, as we said to you, is we believe that really does obscure and prevents any loss of privacy from those particular openings, then it's serving the purpose that we want it to, and therefore asking them to do more than that might be considered to be unreasonable, and therefore the condition would fail the test that it needed to met to be reasonable. So if we've achieved what we need to by having the windows as they currently are, we would advise that we can't reasonably request the applicant to do more than he's already done.
And also, if I can clarify, in condition 3, we have put equivalent to a level 5 obscurity. Now that is, it's a Pilkington glass, it's a trade factor, but it's the most obscure glass that is available on the market. So it's the highest level obscuring that you can achieve, and that's why we've actually set that as a test in condition 3 to avoid that very problem.
Councillor Nottage.
I'm going to try and bring this to some sort of completion, Madam Chairman. I have to say it's reluctantly, but I have the objectives which I have are practical and understanding the position that we're in, and looking towards the position that we have explained, because they heard me as well as hearing you, that this process, this application should proceed along the conditions which are levelled, and with the addition of the notes that we've been talking about, with an appeal to the applicant to understand perhaps a bit more the conditions that have been created by the change of architecture in the unit. So I'm happy to proceed. So I would recommend that we do proceed on this application along those conditions.
Is that a proposal, Mr. Nottage? Councillor Nottage. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Spittle?
Yes, I'm happy to second, as you would anticipate.
So to clarify, we have a proposer and a seconder to approve the application with the conditions as set out in the report, plus the informative note regarding the lighting and painting. Are we happy with that? All those in favour? I shall vote. That's unanimous. That application is approved. I will now give everyone a couple of minutes just to reorganise themselves, and then we'll go on to the next item. So we move on to item B, which is 24 St Margaret's Avenue.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, as set out in the description, this is an amendment to a scheme previously granted by the committee for alterations to this chalet bungalow on St Margaret's Avenue. So there is the location of the property on the corner of St Margaret's and Soapers Lane. Just to show you on the aerial photo, one of the reasons for showing that is just to help members with the relationship with the immediately adjoining properties and the relatively limited depth of the gardens of number 24 and number 22. So that's the location. That shows the general relationship of the property to its immediate neighbours. This is the building as currently is, and the proposals are related to this rear wing of the property here, and the proposals in effect to extend this particular wing. This is existing floor plan, so there is a bedroom currently in that area there, with a dormer window that faces out towards the west over the recreation ground. So as I said, the planning, the building has an approval to extend this element from a hipped to a gable end with a window in here and a new dormer window on the west elevation. The planning permission, which was granted before by the committee, restricted this particular opening to obscure glaze only for reasons that you'll see as we go through the report. And this is the currently proposed application. So the hip to gable extension, which is here, is unchanged. But what's before members currently now is a larger dormer here on the west elevation and a new dormer that's been added to the east elevation here. On floor plan, that shows you what it makes to this particular, the difference it makes to this particular bedroom. So this, where you see the little L-shaped kink out here, that's the dormer on the west elevation facing out, and then a similar sized dormer on the east elevation facing there, and then the gable end with the window on the south. No changes overall to the ground floor plan, Chair. So taking you through a few photos of the site just to help you gain the context. This is the hipped end here, and this gets extended out to a gable end. This is a property in Soapers Lane, so this is looking across the site from Soapers Lane. Again, this is the element that comes across here, so it gets pulled out to a gable end, and then you see the side elevation of the neighbour at Soapers Lane there. This is stood within the garden of the application site. This is the rear of the property in Soapers Lane. I think it's number 70 from my memory. Sorry if I can't remember off the top of my head. But it shows the, in effect, the position of where that rear gable end window would face towards the neighbour here. And again, this is looking back to show you that there's a relatively limited depth to the garden of this particular property. This is looking on the eastern side, so this is the edge of number 24, the application site, and then the side elevation of number 22, just to show that the relative proximity, and you can see what you'll see in the aerial photo later on is this conservatory at number 22, which is just here beyond the boundary fence. This is looking at that same relationship from the road side, so you can see the relative closeness of the two buildings there. Within the garden, so the property is extended across here to form that gable end, and then this new dormer on the west elevation here. And this just shows you a little bit clearer the relationship would be with the Soapers Lane neighbour. So it extends out here, and then there'll be a window on that gable end facing over there. I've just put this chair in as a last slide for you to help you understand the context a little bit more. This is the element that gets extended, so we pull that ridge line down, form the gable end here, and we have a bedroom window in this part here. Our concern is that that could potentially lead to a loss of privacy over the garden area of this neighbour here, which doesn't currently exist. Hence the reason why we recommend that particular window be obscure glaze, and that would be consistent with the previous decision. But what you're also considering now is this dormer on this eastern elevation, and due to the very sort of limited distance that you have there, our concern would be if that wasn't obscure glaze, that you would have a very clear view into the conservatory number 22 and over the whole of its garden area here. And for us, that would be representing an unacceptable loss of privacy to that property and be contrary to your adopted policy. In terms of the larger west-facing dormer, this faces out over here, and we have no objections to that, Chair. So overall, we're satisfied to recommend the application for approval to you, subject to those particular safeguards, and hence the recommendation in the report.
Thank you very much. We have one speaker on this item, Mr. Stevens, the agent for the applicant. If you could introduce yourself, and then we will start the clock.
Good evening. My name is Matt Stevens. I'm a qualified architect and director of Aspire Architects based in Christchurch. Good evening, members of the committee. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak regarding the planning application at 24 St Margaret's Avenue. As you'll see from the case officer's report, this is an amendment to a previous approval where my client is seeking to add an additional dormer window to the east elevation and a larger dormer window to the west elevation. The properties in this location on St Margaret's Avenue and Soapers Lane all have first floor, rear and side windows that overlook each other's gardens and properties with clear glazing. This is a characteristic of how the properties are arranged, and this has evolved over time as properties have been extended and enhanced over the years. The planning officer is recommending approval for the application, but is requesting the use of obscured glazing on the south and east elevations as detailed in condition 4 of the recommended planning conditions. There have been no objections to the planning application from any neighbours, particularly the neighbours at number 70 Soapers Lane or 22 St Margaret's Avenue. In light of this, and the fact that many of the existing properties overlook each other's gardens and properties, please could you support the planning officer's recommendation, but consider my client being able to use clear glazing on the first floor windows. Thank you for your time this evening.
Thank you. We're now going to go into questions. Who would like to start? Councillor Grace.
Can I just ask, will it be level 5 obscurity in the windows, or what level will the glaze be, please?
Yes, Chair. If you look to condition 4, we have referred to level 5 obscurity, so the highest level of obscure glazing.
I'm going to ask a question myself. Could you run me through how mutual overlooking within this kind of area sits side by side with not looking into other people's amenity spaces?
If I look at this aerial photo, Chair, I think that's helpful. If we take a row of properties here and you have first floor windows, then it's not an unusual relationship within an urban area for you to have an oblique view out of a bedroom window here which can see various properties' gardens. We'd expect that in a normal residential relationship. The critical issue for us in here is the position of the east and south dormers, the depths of the gardens, and the proximity. Because that orientation here is in effect separated from the boundary by metre and a half, that would be in very close proximity to the garden area here, and could give a very much a sense of the whole of this space being overlooked by a dormer on here. Similarly, a window in this this south elevation here, our concern is, again, there's a relatively limited depth between the rear and the boundary there, and our concern is, again, that that would give very much a panoramic view, in effect, over this garden area here, and that would lead to a significant loss of privacy. So whilst we might expect, say, a window on this property to have some aspect and some view over here at a big angle, that overall the loss of privacy of the property is fairly limited, and is consistent with the relationship elsewhere. But it's that proximity in the corner of those two properties that concerns us in this particular instance, Chair.
Thank you. Do I have any further questions?
Thank you, Chairman. Would I be able to look back at the pictures of the windows, please, just to look, you know, the actual where the not the pictures, you know, the diagram that you had showing the sizes of the windows, and there was you detailed them in sort of this. I've got them now on bedroom 1. So that's
Do I have any further questions? In that case, we're going to go into debate. Does the ward council wish to kick me off, or?
I actually have looked at this, and I think the west side window I would could stay clear, but I do agree with the officers that the east side window and the south facing window should be of obscure glazing, so that's what I would propose to pass.
Is that an official proposal?
Yes.
Do I have a seconder for that proposal? Councillor Bath?
Yeah, happy to second, along with the other conditions that I've read through with regards to it not being, it's only ancillary to the main building rather than being used independently. So happy to second.
We have a proposal on the table to approve the application as set out by the officers. Do I have any further debate on the item? In that case, we shall go to the vote. All those in favour, and I shall vote. That is unanimous. That application is approved with the conditions set out. And with that, I close the meeting. Thank you very much, everybody.